We're doing this marathon coverage, and it's not here just to update you on this happened and that happened, because that is informational and part of the job which we'll do also. I'm trying to create a momentum here, because G20 is now come and gone, right? So that doesn't mean things have a hard stop. We create the momentum because India is on a momentum and needs to keep it rolling. You have to now get into just thinking differently. I promise you, when I'm teaching somebody new into this profession, and I tell them there's a physicality to the profession, obviously, okay? Sometimes you have to be out on the field, and there are long nights in awkward conditions. But the mental challenge is where you win and lose. And it goes from individuals to teams to organizations to the scale of a country of 1.4 billion people. Once you start having clarity on what it is that you're doing, why you're doing, you have to have a theory, you have to have a clear call to action of converting the theory into practice, and then you can start seeing change. And then something remarkable starts happening. So I'm going to posit to you that yes, there's a classical revivalism, Punar Jagaran, an Indian Renaissance is now in the works. We are rediscovering not only Gandhi, but the Ashoka and the Kautilya and the Nalanda and the Nataraj wheel and the dancing girl and Harappa and the Sindhu civilization. We are rediscovering it in much the same fashion that classical revivalism happened in Europe to end the Dark Ages. And then you got the Da Vinci's and the Michelangelos and the Newtons of the world. You're seeing that happen. At the same time, after having studied international relations through my life, okay, that was my undergraduation, my post-graduation, and having read the theorems of the world and read the clash of civilizations and the end of history, now I'm seeing a theory of the world emanating from India, last probably done as a theory of governance written by Chanakya a long time ago. So I'm understanding that if the Americans say free world, freedom of navigation of seas, for us it is one world, one family, one future, sabka saath, sabka vikas, Vishwamitra. You're seeing a theory. You're seeing a translation of that. Solar Alliance, Biofuels Alliance. This is going to change the way energy systems work in 10 or 20 years. You're seeing a translation on the ground in getting the taps done. You're seeing a logistical transformation happening, just organizing this, a summit like this. So you're seeing that you have to get the jet engine, you have to get the semiconductors, you have to get the batteries made, you have to get the photovoltaics made of the translation onto the ground. This is what makes for a plan that all of us can then ascribe into. Then we all become participants. And once we all become participants, that's it. It's done. Okay? The momentum is going to be unimaginable, because I repeat again, never before in the history of the world have so many young people been in one place at one time. 700 million people younger than me. It will never happen again. There will never again be 700 million people alive at one point of time in one place at one time. It will never happen again. World population will peak, eventually flatline, and then gradually decline. So this is something momentous. Okay, let's hit the ground to get a quick update before I open it up to our guests. Megha Sharma, my colleague, is standing by at the Bharat Mandapam. Megha, so now what's up with the plenary? I'm assuming the plenary is over. We know a couple of bilaterals are still pending. How's the lunch with Macron been?
Right, yes, the plenary got over some time ago after about 12:30 p.m. where the ceremonial gavel was presented by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi and handed it over to the Lula da Silva, the Brazilian president, and taking a look at all the bilaterals that continue to be at this point of time on the anvil, because this Bharat Mandapam, the programs are going to stretch up to 6 p.m., 7 p.m. So what we are getting to understand is, while there was a working lunch meeting that the Prime Minister was supposed to have with President Macron of France, we are still yet to get an update on that. There is also a likelihood of a pull aside that is going to take place between the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. then there are bilaterals that have already happened between India and Turkey. Turkey, the head of the state has just about given held a press conference which is going on currently. We also know that there is in fact, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has also come up with a press briefing earlier today. It was a virtual press briefing, and she again revived for us the points that were mentioned during this entire charter, during this entire this outcome document that has come out, and she'd spoken about that as well, particularly with regards to sustainable development, particularly with regards to decisive, strong leadership in the G20 nations to show the world ahead the path that is going to be for the welfare of all nations, welfare of all countries and economies. We are also waiting for any update on the Brazilian and Indian bilateral that was also going to take place. In fact, Russia has come up with a press briefing that took place with the Foreign Minister Lavrov. He was at his hotel where he's staying. He's been lodged at his hotel Oberoi, and what he said is that he said that he congratulated India and Prime Minister Narendra Modi for this successful G20 chairmanship. He said the Western hegemony is at this point of time a first time broken with this joint declaration that has been released. He's also spoken about how the goals and the focus that was of the emerging economies of the global south have come to the fore once again, and they have forced the causes that the West continues to fight for, which is about the Ukraine war and attacking Russia, that have finally been sidelined. There was also, in fact, a press briefing that was held by the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. He has congratulated India once again for the successful G20 declaration that we were able to achieve, we were able to bring a consensus to. But he's also spoken about Russia and how it needs to withdraw its troops from Ukraine to end this war. Meanwhile, so yesterday there were, like I said, the bilaterals that took place. That was between India and Japan,
we've discussed yesterday. So now we are expecting the events now to conclude. I know the US President has also already departed. Many of the others are still there. So now the G20 part of this is over, right? The last plenary session has happened. Just the bilaterals are now left.
Yeah, only the bilaterals are left. We are also expecting that the Ministry of External Affairs will finally do a final press briefing for the journalists.
They will at the end. I'm assuming when everything else is over. Okay, so how's the situation at the Mandapam now? Is it emptying out? Can you show us around a little bit?
It is. I would in fact come back to you with those visuals because literally.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Megha. The French president is speaking. Let's quickly listen.
And say once again that France stands alongside India. Before I report to you on our conclusions and the way I see them, of course, I would like to say a few words and say that all our thoughts go to Morocco and its people. They are going through a tragedy which is touching all of us. France yesterday, of course, sent a personal message, directly message to the King, Mohammed VI, and we stand ready to send resources whenever Morocco tell us it is the right time to do so. We have technicians who stand ready, and this morning the World Bank, the IMF, the African Union and France as well stood together to send across a strong message to Morocco for reconstruction in this context. And our thoughts also go to Brazil, who suffered a major storm recently. In this context of the G20, I would like to commend the African Union for joining G20 as a full-fledged member. As you know, France was amongst the first ones to support this candidacy, and in Bali we launched a call. At the time, Macky Sall was representing the African Union, and what was at the time a wish is now a reality. The G20 will sit at the table where the decisions are taken, and I'm very pleased that what we were calling for in Bali has now been approved by all. First of all, this G20 confirms once again the isolation of Russia. A vast majority of the G20 members condemn the war in Ukraine and its impacts. and we've been dealing with the economic and food consequences of this war precisely to maintain the unity of the planet. And the entire G20 also commits to a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, and I insist on these words. That's in accordance with the UN Charter, also is a reminder of our support to the principle of territorial integrity. After the summit we organized in Paris that led to the Paris Pact for the Peoples and the Planet, a number of things that we launched have been endorsed here. And what I would like to tell you, what is important here, is that this agenda we've been promoting for a number of years has moved forward on the occasion of this G20 in India. First of all, what we advocated in Paris and what led to this Paris Pact for the Peoples and the Planet was reiterated with many African countries ahead of this summit. They signed together with France a piece in which we were expressing our support for the pact. Let me remind you of the 4 underlying principles. We need not choose between the fight against poverty and the fight for the planet. Second, it is for each country to choose its own path with the support of the international community. Thirdly, we need a major leap when it comes to financing, and all of that very much presided over the conclusions on this topic. When it comes to mobilizing international financing to tackle poverty and climate change, this G20 acknowledged a number of developments. First of all, we exceeded the $100 billion of reallocation of SDRs. It is in 2020, at the time that we decided with the IMF to issue some new SDRs. Then, when we worked on financing the African economies, we agreed to reallocate $100 billion to Africa. And now, and this is the work we undertook back in 2020, it is at last generally $100 billion that are being reallocated. And France did more than what it was requested to do. We reallocated 40% of our SDRs. So I, of course, call upon all countries to continue and, most importantly, to deliver on what they committed to be doing. And next, this year, we will reach the target of $100 billion to finance climate transition in developing countries. And in June, we had a report in Paris telling us that we were about to reach that target. It is a commitment that was made in 2015, and we exerted more pressure so that we could do it. Third element, we could see that what was done in Paris, and remember we had this first meeting of joint financing, all multilateral developing banks attending with the major financial institutions. Well, we got some results. We're increasing the risks taken by our developing banks and development banks, and we're increasing substantially the public finance simply by taking more risks with the existing mechanisms. And this is something that was agreed upon in Paris in June. And at the G20, we all agreed upon this commitment taken in Paris with the goal of having $200 billion of private finance for developing countries. So all of that was initiated in Paris in June and has been approved by the G20. So that's an endorsement of the 4Ps pact. But we want to do more in terms of efficiency. And this is also a commitment that we made in Paris. First of all, we support a deep reform of global governance. This is Security Council, but as well the World Bank and the IMF. They have to reflect today's reality and in terms of demography and economy as well. And then we want to increase the available tools. That's why we want to replenish the World Bank, and France is supporting that so that the emerging countries have a greater role to play. And we want, of course, to increase as well what is allocated to the issue of climate change. And we want some further commitments on behalf of the emerging countries to phase out coal. Next, the IMF. Here again, we expect some greater commitments by the emerging countries when it comes to restructuring the debt of African countries. We stand ready to do more, and we said it today. So it is the very same agenda, a greater financing mobilization around the world. And let me tell you that France upgraded its commitments, and we reached 0.5% of our GDP allocated to development projects. And we also want the same to happen at the international level. And this is the reason why we committed to the replenishment of IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And a meeting will be taking place in December. And I would like to thank President Alvaro Lario of IFAD for being with us today. We need IFAD because IFAD is very much fighting to increase the productivity and the efficiency of the agriculture systems all around the world, in particular given that they are mostly impacted by the war. And then we expressed our support to a number of initiatives taken in Paris or in Nairobi because this massive financing leap also requires some additional resources. So we need to find some new international resources. And together with President Ruto, and allow me to thank him for the work done in Nairobi. So with President Ruto, we agreed to set up a task force on international taxation. And I commend his initiatives for a new kind of carbon tax with a genuine price. So it is the very same agenda and that we are working on climate change. And on Friday, the progress report of the Paris Accord was published, and we're not on the right trajectory. And the G20 is a key player in this. Today, we acknowledge a goal of tripling the production of renewable energy. And we also have the same ambition for low carbon technology, including the nuclear energy. And we're also committed to developing a major vast rail corridor between India, Saudi Arabia and Europe, and in order to transport green hydrogen and to speed up the greening of our industries. But this is not enough. Let me tell you that I'm personally very concerned by some sort of a rising state of mind, including within the G20, on the issue of climate. First of all, it is too easy to say for some of the emerging countries that it is only for the wealthiest country to bear the responsibility. The Europeans are facing their responsibility. We have the only credible international commitments with the Green Deal and the Fit for 55. We're the only ones who set some regulations, new regulations, in order to reach carbon neutrality in 2050 and the goals that were set for 2030. I'm very pleased that some join us with this 2050 target, but at the moment, only the Europeans have set the tools. We have the 100 billion commitment, as said in June in Paris and reiterated here. But many countries need to do more efforts. One cannot say that we will achieve the Paris Agreement goals without phasing out fossil fuels. And this is very much at the heart of the strategy that we're working on together with our partners for the JETPs, partnerships for a just energy transition together with South Africa, Senegal and Indonesia. And this is very much what we've been discussing with a number of partners, including Prime Minister Modi. But more generally, with all emerging countries, we need to phase out coal, and much faster than we are doing. And we need to work on phasing out oil as well, because I can hear some telling us that beyond 2040, 2045, we could still live with oil while comply with the goals set in the Paris Agreement. But I think this is not the case. This is not true. I know it's difficult. It is troubling for a number of emerging countries. Nonetheless, we have to look at science. Lastly, I would like to tell you that we had a chance to talk about technology. On artificial intelligence, France has a double purpose. We want to develop innovation and investments and make sure there is no technological and digital divide on the issue of artificial intelligence. We want all of the G20 countries to have access to it for their development. And in addition, it is absolutely necessary to regulate these technologies, make sure that there is no fake or manipulation of information and anything that would threaten our democracies. So we support the idea of international regulations, and just like we did on minimal taxation and in other topics, we work together with the OECD. And together with Canada in particular, we launched a partnership for international artificial intelligence, and together with the support of the OECD. And the OECD can gather the international community beyond its members. And it is very much necessary for the purpose of regulating IA. And once again, I would like to commend the Indian presidency of the G20. Brazil will take over, and they have our full confidence. We will work together with them closely on a number of topics: protection of forestry, food sovereignty, social justice. And as you know, since 2018, we've been strongly advocating these topics. Without further ado, I'm all yours for your questions. Mr. President, good afternoon. Back to the G20. This compromise seems to be not exactly what France was expecting, and Ukraine expressed their disappointment, whereas Russia seems to be said they were satisfied. So is this due to the emerging countries? Next, on climate change, you express your concerns. You're calling to do more. Is this a bad signal at this G20 ahead of COP28? First of all, let us face it, let's be honest, that the G20 is not a forum for political discussions. It was revived at the time of the financial crisis a few years ago. And we're here to mainly talk about economic topics and climate change. So I think the G20 should not get stuck into some other issues. But of course, we know that we disagree on Ukraine, given that Russia is a member of the G20. But as a matter of fact, things have been said. The G20 said it supports a just and lasting peace. This is exactly the opposite of what Russia is saying. And the G20 itself re-expressed our support to territorial integrity and the UN Charter. So that's it. But that being said, this is not the place where we will see some major developments, given in particular what the situation is on the ground. And we have here 16 members of the G20 who voted, approved all the resolutions that condemn Russia. 3 abstained and 1 voted against. And of course, this is Russia. So Russia precisely is in a very isolated position at the G20. Nonetheless, this is not the place for major diplomatic moves. On climate change, I think there is one point, financing, on which we've achieved some major progress.
Okay, you've been hearing the statement from the French president. And of course, he's taking questions. He's answered the big one on Ukraine and Russia, and you heard the answer there. General Rajan Kochar, still with us as RBS Money. I still have joining us now on the broadcast, Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee. Charles Thompson is joining us from Sydney. Walter Anderson is joining us from the United States. Ruchir Punjabi, the founding chair of the Australia-India Youth Dialogue, joining us on the broadcast, as is Ambassador Kamal Sibal, the former Foreign Secretary, all on the broadcast with us. We've been listening into this conversation. Let me jump onto it with Professor Anderson. Professor Anderson, I'm sure you've had a chance now to absorb the developments of the past 24 hours. What's your general summation of how it's gone?
I have to correct you. I'm actually in the UK right now. I'm in London.
Right.
I come here every year this time to go theater hopping. So we're in between watching theater. In any case, in terms of my impression of what's been happening, I'm reading it often through the British eyes here, where of course there's been a lot of focus on, the British Prime Minister. And when he got to India, he said he was going to put pressure on Russia, and then this agreement comes out. And I think that is a reflection of the prestige in which Modi holds, that he was able to get divergent views to agree to what is in fact a compromise solution. Russia isn't directly attacked, but it is indirectly mentioned when it says that no country should use nuclear threats. That's a direct, mention of Russia without saying Russia by name, and that countries should respect the territorial integrity. That's in there as well. To no one's surprise, that refers to Russia, but it's not a direct attack on Russia. So it's a kind of compromise, and I think that reflects the prestige in which Modi is held, that he was able to get the various sides to come together. In fact, Jai Shankar said they spent hours working on the language on this, and I can believe it, being formerly in the Foreign Service myself, these words count. And so they spent a long time to come up with a solution that was a compromise so that everyone would agree. And in fact, all of the documents had an agreement on them, and it was done the first day, which surprised a lot of people that they were able to get this done and release a document on the very first day. I think, one of the things that strikes me is that.
Can you hear us, sir?
Advances his goal of India being at the high table. In fact, it is at the high table in this particular meeting. I have something that says my internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Okay. So the first point is he furthered the goal of India being at the high table of international politics. The second is he, I think, also laid the groundwork or strengthened his position as a representative of the global South. And much of the discussion and the documents and the pre-meetings, and there were over 200 pre-meetings to the summit, related to how to improve the economic conditions of the global South, that he's been speaking up in their favor. And finally, I think what this does is one shouldn't forget that India has elections coming next year. And this, I think, perhaps helps him in the elections, in that he and India are held up as a model of international diplomacy, which is something I think he wants. And in fact, it doesn't hurt that the Indian module landed on the moon, 2 weeks ago or something like that. And India also then set off another space rocket to go around the sun, I think about a week and a half ago. All this, of course, helps India as reflecting its technological strength.
Yes.
Now, there are some problems we may want to get into, but I think, your question was...
Yeah. Okay. So, in summation, not so bad. Ambassador Mukherjee, your quick thoughts? Yeah, go ahead, ma'am. Somebody will figure that out for you. Go ahead.
I think, Rishabh, the most important aspect of the hugely successful G20 and the manner in which India pulled it off, bringing the African Union so that for the first time the G20 has a semblance of democracy and equality in its composition, and then bringing this masterpiece document after what Jai Shankar said and Amitabh Kant said, what 200 hours of extremely tense negotiations where actually we said everything which needed to be said without finger pointing into the eyes and nose of people, which the West is so fond of doing, thinking that makes it more effective. I think it was a Chanakya-like document. But more than anything else, Rishabh, it demonstrated how ineffective is the Security Council and its P5 because a non-P5 member pulled off what the P5 cannot do because they are quarreling with each other. I beg to differ from Mr. Walter Anderson to say it doesn't help India's election because Indians are a vibrant democracy who look for development, food, all the things that matter in United States and United Kingdom. It doesn't really matter whether we finally got into an elite club or not, or the G20. The G20 probably matters more because Prime Minister Modi took care to ensure that G20 meetings were held across the length and breadth of this vast country that we call Bharat, and so that every Indian felt that he had a stake or she had a stake in the G20, which was not how summits were done in the past. But the success of the G20 shows an emerging power bloc which can no longer be denied by the so-called victors of World War II.
Okay.
This is a power structure that has to be given recognition, and in the absence of that recognition, you have the G20.
Okay. Do we now have a better understanding, Ambassador Sybil, a better understanding and a better acceptability and a better gravitas in what our worldview is with the adoption of the conceptualization, as the Americans used to say, free world, free trade, freedom of navigation of the seas, the 14 points. Now we have a Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the translation, the gravitas in the room to actually get people to listen to, wisdom and logic. Are we heading in that direction?
Well, the international community doesn't have a choice in this regard if they want to resolve the issues that are facing every country today, and very serious issues. But, we've seen ups and downs in international relations. And the fact that the G20 meeting has been successful, there has been a joint statement, certainly is a very positive development. But this is simply, as Prime Minister himself said, giving expression to the aims and to the principles on which international community should interact with each other. Now the hard process will begin now, how to translate these goals and principles into real action on the ground. We've seen in other international organizations, they come out, even in the climate change negotiations, they come out with an agreed document, and then we find that the progress on the ground is not sufficient until the next meeting, and then again, everybody agrees to certain principles, and then this goes on. So let's not hype this up as if the world is now embarked on an absolutely new way of doing things. However, insofar as India is concerned, I think it's a huge success for Indian diplomacy that we were able to get this joint statement, this consensus document, when the apprehensions were, and genuine apprehensions, that we would fail in this regard, because earlier on the foreign minister level meeting, finance minister level meeting, development minister level meeting ended with a chair summary and not a joint statement. And the fact that the G7 leaders and others who've been very strong, very aggressive on the Ukraine issue and on Russia were present on this occasion, the concern was that if their ministers could not make compromises, they will find it even more difficult, because if they made a compromise, then they would be accused by their own media and their own think tanks and their own international relations experts of having made a compromise. Mm-hmm. But this is actually what has happened. Now the question is, why has this happened? To my mind, it is because there is great interest in the G7 plus to maintain the viability of the G20 platform, because this is the only platform where you have the developed countries and major developing countries together. And they have an eye on what is happening in BRICS. BRICS is expanding. It will expand more next year. and it is a platform in which there is no Western country present. And therefore, a narrative will be built by BRICS, which will counter the narrative of the G7. So G20 is in the middle. And therefore, it is vital for them to keep this alive. And if they have not succeeded in issuing a joint statement, my view is that this would have been the beginning of the end of the G20 as a credible platform.
Okay.
So everybody has made compromises. The West has made compromises. And I must say, I must applaud them that they have done so. They have taken a constructive approach at some cost. Russia has also yielded here and there, though, of course, very clearly, even compared to the Bali language. Although there are a lot of paragraphs on Ukraine,
yes.
Actually speaking, it is also a victory for Russian diplomacy, and far more than anything else, it's the victory for Indian diplomacy that we could actually issue a consensus.
Okay, so the diplomatic process has gone off well. The administrative and the sheer logistical process has obviously gone off well. But are we seeing, sir, a theme emerging, at least of us having a better understanding of our requirements, our needs, our worldviews, our theosophy, our approach to these matters? Is it convenient sloganeering, or do we actually buy into the concept of one world, one family?
Well, yes, of course. I think the world is buying into this progressively. They have no choice. But what is important in this is that the Global South has asserted itself. It's not simply that the African Union has been included as a permanent member. If you look at the briefing we have given, Amitabh Kant has said that the burden of negotiating a text was taken upon by Indonesia. India, of course, was leading, and Brazil and South Africa, which means the president of the G20, the last president of the G20, and the next two presidents of the G20. Mm-hmm. So it is the four countries, and then they mobilized Saudi Arabia and Turkey into this. It is the Global South then persuaded both the G7 plus as well as Russia and China to agree to this compromise document. So to that extent, yes, the weight of the Global South is being asserted within the G20 platform. There is no doubt.
So we will take some seminal moments from this. That moment on which the African Union sits down on the table and can quickly the board and the flag is put up there. That's a moment that you're going to take away from this. The acceptability of India being the voice of the Global South is something that is increasingly recognizable. And you saw India's Prime Minister, of course, at ASEAN just 2-3 days ago, right before this, taking place. Okay, let me quickly get Charles Thompson into this conversation. Mr. Thompson, how have you seen from an Australian eye, should we be cynical and be thinking that, oh, hang on, it was all about Ukraine, and if that didn't go exactly how we would have liked to have scripted it, then it's not worth having been done?
First, on a lighter note, whilst China's been so busy issuing maps and trying to change names of places, what has Modi's G20 done? It's brought a whole lot of new words into the international community. And I can absolutely assure you that lots of diplomats and lots of politicians around the world have been getting their dictionaries and asking what these words are. And the two classics were Bharat and Sherpa. I mean, all my Indian friends understand what the meaning of Sherpa is. And I believe the Chinese also officially, I'm not sure about this, but I heard, complained about the use of Sanskrit, which is just delightful. Now, on a more serious note with China, I mean, the whole idea of announcing a transport project linked from India to Middle East to Europe must have upset the Chinese big time. And of course, what's going to happen? In the next few years, the world's going to compare the cost of the Indian part, which let's say it'll cost $1 billion, while the Chinese are spending $10 billion. I mean, the Indians are masters, we've seen this with space, at producing things at a very low cost. So no wonder the president of China didn't come to the G20. And of course, but from an Australian perspective, and once again on a serious note, the Australian Prime Minister tweeted that he's really happy with the discussions with the Honourable Prime Minister about finalising the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement between Australia and India. And that's a big ticket item. I mean, that's a transformative item, I think, for both countries.
Yeah, okay. Ruchir, come into this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, a big part of the narrative in Australia is around the Chinese leader's absence and what that means for both Australia's engagement with G20 and China's engagement with G20. I think given what India has delivered, and obviously they're far greater experts on the topic here in terms of engagement with the Global South, the corridor we just discussed and so on. I think there's a more positive reinforcement of India's position in its multilateral position in the world. I think Australia obviously has taken very keen interest it has taken keen interest for a long time, but India has come to the table in the last 3 to 4 years since the China situation with India. And I feel this relationship is getting stronger and deeper now.
Okay, so you see some progress. I mean, then of course comes in the translation into reality. And let me get Rajan Kochhar into the General Kochhar. Now G20 is done. I think there was a significant statement that came out at the very end, and which was from the next 3 presidents, which was very specifically about the WTO. Because as Ambassador Sibal was saying, as Ambassador Mukherjee was saying, in the end you have to translate, and that translation is always the devil is in the detail. Are we seeing some detailing there on some specific issues? The corridor has been brought up. That's a specific matter. The WTO reform, specific matter. The biofuels alliance, something specific. Some specifics have been achieved.
You're absolutely right, Rishabh, and these specifics are extremely important because China's Belt Road Initiative straight away gets affected. And that's going to teach China a lot. And as rightly said by Charles, we will produce it at 1/10 the cost. And second important aspect we actually saw missing is the meeting between a bilateral meeting between the US President Biden and PM Modi. And what is important in this bilateral meeting is about the critical and emerging technologies, what has been finally inked, because Prime Minister Modi had gone to the US and now it has been finalized. A telecommunication MOU, Bharat 6G Alliance and the American Alliance counterpart has also been inked. And the IITs of India and the Association of American Universities have also got together, bringing up technology in the form of startups to India.
Okay.
So what is actually happening is that with this thing happening, the stature of India has gone. And in the eyes of G20, as we are seeing, a voice of India is being heard. And with this WTO and international taxation regime is also coming up, because this issue was also discussed that we need to have a uniform taxation regime, which is going to help.
So highly complex things on so many fronts that you can pick up so many threads. But of course, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. The good thing about this critical technologies is that not only a conversation is had, a review meeting is immediately going to happen as soon as the summit ends. So they agreed to it in June. They've discussed it now at the highest levels right now, and a review meeting on what has been implemented. This is what translates work into action. Let me quickly just get Ambassador Mukherjee back into this. Ambassador Mukherjee, so now the translation part, so a whole plethora of things culminate into this, and a whole lot of initiatives get started. Now the translation part, what are the themologies when we look at security, when we look at energy, when we look at new world order, new organizations that represent the world, the leadership of the global south? Do we have some themologies where India, what India says and does and looks digital is another one, is now mattering and then therefore translating into real action?
I think one of the most significant developments, Rishabh, which I saw on television yesterday also, was the launch of the Global Biofuel Alliance. And as one of my co-panelists just spoke, the significance of this connect between India and Europe through the Middle East. These are two developments which are of fundamental importance, quite apart from the bilaterals, as for instance what Charles said about the trade agreement between India and Australia, etc., etc. More than that, I think that the G20 finally has established itself as an order which is democratic and representative of developed and developing countries that goes far beyond G7. And with the inclusion of Africa, it has finally come of age in the sense that it understands, as India has been insisting, that for enhanced prosperity, global prosperity, you have to carry Africa with you. And we demonstrated that during the pandemic when we shared our vaccines, when we didn't have enough. But today, with the Africans on board, there will be a fundamental change over the years in the manner in which the G20 does business. And all these initiatives that have been adopted, including on climate change, biofuels, etc., these, with the Africans on board, it will be far more effective. And it is very important, as you said,
so
that there's going to be an implementation.
So something of importance. So now I think, Ambassador Sibal, are we seeing an architecture that we are now seeing crystallizing, that you have the Quad heading toward the Quad Plus, where clearly India is paying a lot of attention to ASEAN. There was a reason that Prime Minister Modi was there 2 days ago. He could have had a good reason, good enough excuse not to be there, but he was there. In representation of Africa through G20, now G20 Plus and BRICS, are we seeing a new organization that will define the next decade or so?
I think what you are seeing is what is actually happening on the ground, a fragmentation of the international community. After all, Quad or Quad Plus, we want to bring Indonesia in. What is the aim and purpose of Quad is to meet the China challenge. And insofar as the BRICS is concerned, what is the goal of BRICS? Multipolarity. And create an alternative international order which is not dictated by the West, or which only meets the priorities of the West, and develop a new idiom of global governance. Now, G20 straddles these two. But if the major powers on one side, the G7 plus and China and Russia, continue to be adversarial, and this is going to be adversarial for the years ahead, then the international system is not going to work in a cooperative manner. And therefore, while G20 and other organizations, platforms can do their own work in terms of addressing the problems that we face, unless this basic issue, new Cold War that we are seeing, unless that is handled properly, we'll continue to have the problems. And even with regard to reform of the WTO or Biofuels Alliance or everything else, you need cooperation, you need understanding, you need dialogue. And unless there is no proper dialogue between the G7 and Russia and China on the other side, we're going to have difficulties.
Okay, so the question then remains is, can we make that happen? Like I said, I don't want to use the word mediators, but can you be the consensus builders to get this going? To some extent, yeah. So it's at least.
And India is in a very critical position because we have got very good relations with the United States, very good relations with Europe, very good relations with Russia, and therefore we are in a position actually, and then we are a democracy. So if there is a criticism that BRICS is a combination of all these autocracies and stuff like that, but we are a democracy, so we are a modifying force, we are a stabilizing force, and we have shown and demonstrated in the G20 how we can.
I think that's a good point, and you're also that person in the room which is invited, welcomed, reasonably respected, and heard out in every room. And that sometimes that's also becomes critically important. Okay, I'm short of time, so let me just take last word before we take a break. You're seeing live visuals, of course, that are coming in on your screens. There's the French president now heading off for that bilateral meeting. His press conference at the Bharat Mandapam has ended. I'm told the Prime Minister of India will be visiting the crafts exhibition as well, because like I said, this is about classical revivalism in India also. So let's not discount all these things. They all add up to the puzzle piece which needs to be put together. Quick thoughts, Wing Commander Bakshi, quick thoughts now on how we keep the momentum going.
Rishabh, the momentum has to go on. There's no doubt about it. So much of achievement is done. But let me tell you one thing, the things which are there on the table, which are, for example, the threat looming large, ASEAN countries and G20 countries, there are commonality in between them and there are common problems. All these things are good enough for long term, but immediate requirement has to be dealt with. You will see there is a commonality factor of threat in South China Sea, etc., which is there, where America has seen into the game. It is trying to bring India into it. So the consolidation will be there. And I go with Mr. Sibal. He said that India is getting influenced by America, vice versa, because we are democracies. That's why we were hesitant in Quad initially. And militarization of Quad will be a thought process which has to be deliberated upon, because then only things will work out. If you don't have peace, let me tell you one thing, all these things, thought processes will take very, very long to settle down.
Okay, Ambassador Sibal, I see you. I'm just coming to you in a second, sir. A quick last thought, sir, Mr. Mani.
Rishabh, that we have to now from here, we have the template on the ground. We have now achieved a certain level of milestone. From here, let us not simply try to bite more than what we can do. Make it biteable chunks, slowly, gradually, but it is a long road ahead. But certainly, at certain level of time, we will get the deliverables, especially on the corridor from Middle East to Europe, especially certain low-hanging fruits have to be attacked first. And that is the way we have to take it forward.
Okay.
See, the entire hard work which has been done cannot be allowed to go astray. I am sure the present leadership, the bureaucracy as well as everybody will take it forward, make it into smaller, biteable chunks, take it forward.
Okay.
So
yeah, there are many threads to pick up. I'm going to try to pick up some of those threads later on in the evening. Walter Anderson, just your thoughts now on Narendra Modi himself. There comes a time when you pivot into some sort of international leadership. You had Clinton, getting into the Good Friday Accords, and Tony Blair becoming, a special envoy in the Middle East. Checkered success. What does Narendra Modi represent now as a global leader?
Well, I think he has aspirations to be a leader at having India have a seat at the high table, and these meetings have done a long way to bring him into kind of general respect. The very fact he was able to work out in very quick fashion, or relatively quick fashion, an agreement to which they all agreed, particularly on the Ukraine issue, stands to his credit. Most people know that. I'm sitting here in the UK, and they're writing about that here in the UK as probably what they think, at least many of the journal writers here on international affairs, as the major achievement of this meeting, because many people felt this was going to fall apart. I think Ambassador Sibal is absolutely right. I've always admired his analysis, is when he talks about you have to sort of bring this down to earth. It has to be realistic. And the proposal to have an India, Middle East, Europe corridor, I think is a brilliant one, because it makes, it's to benefit of many people, particularly in the third world, and certainly here in India. But there's also a proposal which hasn't been mentioned yet to have a corridor across Africa. And I understand the initial meetings have been held on that. So I think, the idea of very specific issues should be addressed. And don't forget the proposal. One of the documents talks about almost $6 billion should be allocated for climate change for poor countries that cannot afford it. This is part of, I think, of Prime Minister Modi's positioning himself as a leader of the global South. Now it's up to the countries to come up with the money. And already some countries have been proposing that they will donate X amount to this fund for the global South on issues that they can't afford.
Okay. Ambassador Sibal, your quick interjection, please. Sir, can you hear us? Can we figure out PCI? For some reason, we can't hear him.
He's on mute.
Yeah, there we go. But that should be controlled by PCI. They should be able to figure it out. Yeah, there we go. We got you now. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think one important aspect we should keep in mind is that there was a desire on the part of the United States in particular and the West in general that this meeting should be successful in order not to deliver a diplomatic blow to Prime Minister Modi and to India. I think this was also in the mind of the people that if the G20 did not succeed in issuing a joint statement, it will not be helpful to Prime Minister Modi and India, which had invested so much of their capital into this meeting, and therefore a little bit in deference to this.
Yes.
To India, they made these concessions, which is important in the long run.
Yeah, it's a sign of respectful credibility that at least we care enough to understand that yes, this needs to get done, and thank you for working it out with us.
Number two, I've seen this in my discussions at various levels here in foreign countries, that there's a great respect for Modi as a man of ideas. And just now it was mentioned how we have put a lot of ideas on the table which have become part of the international vocabulary. This is Modi's strength and India's strength, that we put a lot of new ideas on the table because he's considered a man of ideas and he's respected for that. So that will give India strength in the years ahead when we try and shape the global
absolutely, and we all have to be actors and participants in the thought leadership and the action that needs to follow it. You have to have the idea, then you have to have the wherewithal to deliver it. Quick last thoughts, Ambassador Mukherjee, before I take a break.
I completely agree with Ambassador Sibal that there must have been also in the minds of the leaders who came, particularly President Biden, that this summit was also crucial for the India G20 presidency under Prime Minister Modi. So much has been invested, so many efforts, so many hours of negotiations have ended in an impasse, that there has to be some kind of flexibility shown so that a summit document can be adopted, so that the impression is not given that the G7 countries did not allow India to have a compromised New Delhi declaration.
So that feeds into the logic that they are that it suits them, that for India to represent the voice of Africa and ASEAN, it suits them as well. Their credibility as well for that to happen. So it's not a zero-sum game. It's not a competition for influence. There is some congruence of interest there also. Ruchir, if you're still with us, quick last thought.
I think the hard piece here is obviously of Africa Union and European Union are very different blocks. I think thinking about them in the same voice is not necessarily fair, and I think it's going to be a challenge to bring the actual voice of more than 50 countries to the table. I think the other part here is there are a bunch of things around climate change that were expected but did not materialize, and I think that conversation is quite urgent. So there's a lot more work to be done is what I wanted to say.
Okay, all right. Mr. Mani, quick last thoughts and I'll wind up.
Investment, no doubt about it. It has happened and they didn't want to be seen. G7 countries did not want to be seem to be scuttling an initiative. That type of issues were there. On that, I am on the same page with Colonel Ambassador Sibal. But again, the proof of the pudding is in eating, and that's where I say let us start with the low-hanging fruit, which are easily implemented. Plus, these frameworks have to be also delivered through deliverables in the bilaterals, which is already, some of them have happened, some of them are happening.
Yeah.
The Indo-Australian Economic Cooperation Agreements have already happened. So let us walk it. I'm sure there will be much more which will be coming out of the synergy of these initiatives like the biofuel, the solar alliances and all that. Much more. And as it says, the terrorism part of it, very importantly, the security part about...
Yeah, so this conference is less about security, but let's not kid ourselves. Security is overarching and it creeps into everything. But yes, so let me pick up the threads. Let me pick up at the corridor. The biofuels for one is fundamentally important. India's solar capacity has gone up exponentially. 200,000 megawatts of solar power. We are going to double that in the next few years. So Solar Alliance, biofuels. Imagine a day when it's not a fossil fuel economy where we don't have to pay a percentage of the Consolidated Fund of India just importing oil. These are all setting the stage for momentous things, which are not going to happen overnight. We'll have to chip away into them. So we'll have to continue at that.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.